Hi, it's Joan with the University of Florida IFAS Extension Services, Pinellas County, and I'm pleased to introduce the first in a series we're producing here called Digging Into Weedon, where we get to meet archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, students, and others whose research and discoveries help us envision and understand what it must have been like to live here thousands of years ago. In today's program, I'm pleased to sit down with Phyllis Kolianos, who is involved from the beginning to the end in the fascinating and complicated journey of our very own Weedon Island Canoe, from the mangrove peat in which it was discovered all the way to its resting cradle here on display at Weedon Island Preserve. A journey that spanned almost 15 years. Phyllis is an amazing resource, and her passion for the discovery, for the process of excavation and restoration, and for the story it tells us about the people who lived here and the world that they lived in thousands of years ago is a real treat. So before we start today's interview, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Phyllis's background. Phyllis received her BA and Master's from the University of South Florida in Applied Anthropology. Retired from Pinellas County government, she managed the Weedon Island Preserve Cultural and Natural History Center and was instrumental in the establishment of the Alliance for Weedon Island Archaeological Research and Education, AWARE, and their research station at the preserve. Phyllis currently serves as Secretary for AWARE and continues with an active archaeological research of the Central Gulf Coast and Tampa Bay region. In addition, she has been on the Executive Board of the Tarpon Springs Area Historical Society for many years, and she was recently reappointed to the Pinellas County Historical Preservation Board. Phyllis, good morning. It is a privilege to sit down with you today, and I want to welcome you back to your old stomping grounds.
Yes, it's a pleasure always.
So Phyllis, you were involved from the very beginning in the long and careful process of bringing us the Weedon Island Canoe. Can you take us back to when you first heard about the discovery and tell us more?
Yes, actually we opened the Cultural and Natural History Center in December of 2002. And after the following year, I received a phone call from a local resident saying he thought he found an ancient canoe. And we were in the process of a lot of things going on here. We were still working on our exhibits, and I said, okay, well, eventually he sent me photographs of this canoe that he proclaimed to have found. And I shared those with some others, and everybody was a little bit dubious about it. Eventually, the year went by, and we were into 2004, maybe even 2005. He sent me a video where he had reinterred it or uncovered it again, and it was pretty astounding. So I talked with the land management here, and we decided we would go out to see where this was. In our journey, though, we never could find it. So we finally eventually had to get him to come with us and show us exactly the spot. And once we saw it and were able to unveil a little bit of it, we knew that it was something important. So the year went by, again, busy at the center, and but meanwhile we decided to try to get the permitting, because it was on an intercoastal area that was under the control of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and land management, and Pinellas County and the state. It was on state land, to investigate it. And people from, colleagues from the University of Florida came down to help us with that project. And meanwhile, we had an intern investigate how to build a cofferdam around this area. And we had decided to actually do this in December because it had the lowest tides, and we knew we needed the time to be able to actually investigate this, this canoe. So anyway, we kept working on it, and finally in December of 2007, our whole team went out on boats. We uncovered the entire canoe. It was measured. It was sampled for the wood, the type of wood, and so we could do radiocarbon dating. We were completely photographed and videotaped by Pinellas County at the time to get every bit of information we could. We measured it, and it was just shy of 40 feet long. And the problem was the back end had been sheared off. So we knew the canoe was actually longer than what we thought it was. And so we have photographs of how that looked in situ. So it was quite an undertaking. So we brought all the information back, but there was one other thing that happened while we were out there, and that was another find. Underneath the canoe was lodged a pole. And that pole, we were able to get some sections of it out from beneath the canoe, and the investigators all thought, oh, somebody's tried to pry that canoe out of its original, resting place. But reading up about poles having been found with different canoes, we knew that was a really important aspect. So the Friends of Weedon Island came up with the funding to have the radiocarbon dates done, and we had the pole tested also, and it came back in the same range of time that the canoe was also dated, and that was about 1,100 years ago. So it was quite a find, and so we covered it all up very carefully and had to sit back and think and figure, okay, what's our next step? And of course we were in contact with the state of Florida, their preservation specialists. The curator and preservation specialist with the state recommended different things that we would do to go ahead and build a tank to put the canoe in. We needed to get a chemical named polyethylene glycol to soak the canoe in. We call it PEG. And so all these things had to be done in preparation if we ever actually were able to remove it. So we worked on the funding. Again, Friends of Weedon Island came to the rescue and gave us WARE at that time was the group that was working on with this, and gave us a lot of money to help with build the tank and get going on the whole project. We finally, with all the permitting in place, which included having the indigenous tribes of Florida okaying it, we were able to actually remove the canoe in March of 2011. And we were again working with the tides and making sure that we were able to succeed in what we were going to accomplish. Yes, we did have to cut the canoe into 10-foot sections, 4 10-foot sections. That was a recommendation by the state preservationists, and it did work out because it fit perfectly into our tank, and we were able to take the canoe onto a boat and be able to bring it back to shore. Everything was very carefully done, but also very swiftly done, because we needed to keep the canoe moist, and also when we got it back, we realized that the canoe had been riddled with worms. So one of our surprises, once we got it in the tank, was that the worms started to come out of the wood, and we were having the fun time of removing the worms from the water and PEG solution. So that was a fun time. Worms, they really had a field day here. You can see how they ate into the wood once it became exposed to the elements. Years went by, 3 years in preservation of the canoe, and we had to spend 1 year actually drying the canoe. We had it in the air-conditioned space at the research station, and finally organizing the funding that was needed to put on the exhibit. And we were lucky to have several foundations as far as helping us with the funding, and also the Florida Humanities Council helped with funding. And so then we went into the process of planning an exhibit and doing that properly. So it was a long process. In 2016, I can't remember quite the month. I want to say June, but anyway, we were able to put the canoe on display, and in the exhibit that it is in now, where our organization donated the exhibit to Pinellas County. And of course the canoe belongs to the state of Florida. So it's on a long-term loan process here at Weedon Island Center.
That is fascinating. Hearing about all the challenges that you faced, not only from Mother Nature with the tides and the worms, but also in the process of excavating and licensing and moving and getting it on display. Can you tell us in all of that, Phyllis, what would be your most satisfying moment?
Oh, I think probably the initial investigation of it was just amazing to actually see this ancient canoe dugout laying in this intertidal area zone, and still there. I mean, because wood does not, save very well. We have a real problem with wet site archaeology, and that it still would be able to, hold it together. One of the disappointments, though, was because of the years that passed from the initial finding of the canoe to when we could actually retrieve it and to preserve it, there was a deterioration. From a photograph that we have, I know in the exhibit, of when the local residents found and photographed the canoe, there was a lot more substance to it until, what we have today. But it's still, it's a great find. It really is.
So the deterioration that you talk about, is that because the canoe was exposed to air?
Yes, the peat, the mangrove peat that actually encompassed the canoe, kept it in an anaerobic environment, so that worms and other things couldn't get into it to destroy the wood. That's one of the plagues of any saltwater environment. And so once that seal is broken, then the worms have a free, day of it, going in and getting the wood. So that was one of the things that happened. I know I spoke to different archaeologists that have worked with freshwater canoes, and they have said there was no sign of any worms ever disturbing those canoes. So we were working against an element that, that's a natural element that, happened.
Is this one of the only saltwater canoes found in Florida?
Well, they say that there are a few others that are associated with a saltwater environment. But this is the only one that I have heard about that's actually been found in that intertidal water where it, came to rest 1,000 years ago. And not only that, it is also the longest prehistoric canoe that has ever been found in the state of Florida. And because like I said, the back end apparently had been sheared off, I often thought maybe from when they were doing mosquito ditching around the preserve. It was probably close to 45 feet long. And the narrowness of the canoe is also something of interest. We visualize that perhaps it's used like a catamaran or maybe an outrigger type of canoe, which would be amazing if we ever found any evidence, to go along with that. So, it's an intriguing mystery too.
There were some other mysteries about the canoe. Can you tell us about them?
Well, there are several things that were surprising that we didn't know until we actually took it out of the preservation tank. In the bottom of the canoe, we found holes that looked like they were used for something. We don't know what they were used for. I know the Seminole canoes, they would actually dig a hole in the bottom of their canoe to gauge how thick the bottom was. But these don't seem to go all the way through. So were they holding up something, like a mask or something? I mean, your mind can go to different ideas. But anyway, that was an interesting discovery when we took it out of the preservation tank.
Phyllis, is there some thinking or some theory as to why the canoe was abandoned or how it came to find its way in the mangrove peat?
Not really any theories, but we had worked on another site prior to that, restoring a midden area that was close by. And we know that there were Native American settlements or maybe small campsites or villages all along that coast. For example, Yakatishi is not far from where it was found. Also, this shoreline midden was close by also. So it could have been part of their transportation that they used. And so it kind of all ties together.
Phyllis, is there some thought about why the canoe was abandoned to begin with?
I doubt if it was really left behind. You've got to understand that the native peoples, that was their car of the day. I mean, everybody had a canoe probably, maybe not one this long, but that was, the way of transportation. I mean, Florida was a watery world. And so I think that probably maybe something had happened to it and they think, okay, let's move on. We'll get a new one or something. I don't know.
Is there anything else that you would like people to take away from their experience in viewing and learning about our canoe?
I think, Weedon Island is a very special place. And it has a huge history of pre-Columbian presence here. And I think that the canoe just adds to that story. I don't think that, I don't know, there are several special places, in Pinellas County, but this is number one to me. In fact, that's what they call it in the state. It's what they call 8PI1. It's the number one in Pinellas County. So it's a very special place, and I hope people come out and enjoy it and enjoy the exhibit.
Phyllis, thank you so much for taking us on this fascinating journey from discovery to display of our Weedon Island canoe. And having been part of that journey, hearing it from you has just been so interesting and so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.